Hey punks, welcome back to the University of Radlands. Have another video here for you today, and it's going to be a little different than normal, maybe a little bit more somber or sad, as this video is going to be about the camps that Daniel has mentioned in his recent posting are going to be replaced in the new Cult of the Chrome expansion. So I wanted to take some time to maybe talk about each a little bit, reflect on them, maybe discuss why they're possibly being looked at replaced, and allow you to do the same. So please feel free in the comments to do that. I do want to give a shout out to Troy P, who over a year ago in one of the comments asked me to do a video on cache. Well, here it is. We're going to talk about cache, Troy, and maybe not in the way that you had originally hoped. A little bit more of a sadder cache discussion, but let's get started. So command post, pretty easy to talk about. It's just being switched from 2 starting cards to 1. The designer Daniel mentioned that was being looked at or done because the new camps in the game might interact with punks a little bit more, and so with more punks being in the game, this would be a pretty powerful 2 starting camp card because you're going to be able to find more combos in your camps to interact with it. So pretty easy to talk about. The card's essentially staying the same, but just giving you 1 card instead of 2. I already have a video on Mercenary Camp. Makes sense while they're getting rid of this. Potentially a lot of Board Game Geek discussions and Facebook posts talked about how some people even just leave this camp out altogether. It can be pretty oppressive to start the game. It's actually really the only camp in the game that allows you to potentially destroy one of your opponent's camps on the very first turn. So if you're going first and have just 1 water, if you have any card that allows you to junk for water, you can play this ability then on the first turn. And if the opponent doesn't want to discard 2 cards or isn't able to discard 2 cards, they then have to destroy a camp right on your very first turn. So pretty powerful. It's also the only card in the game that interacts with your opponent's hand. So I could see why they are moving away from that design space with Mercenary Camp. Resonator, the designer has discussed this is just kind of a weaker railgun. Originally, during the Kickstarter design, gave you 2 starting water. Well, they found in their play testing that people were probably picking this a little more often than they liked, so they bumped it down to 1, which makes it kind of significantly weaker card. You can only aim at unprotected and damaged cards, so pretty limited on the targets that you can do. But if it's the only damage or destroy dealing card in your camps, it might be one to consider. So that's why that one's being replaced. Again, another one in different forms and discussions that was talked about as being on the weaker side that a lot of people weren't picking. Training Camp, again, probably just not picked a lot. Again, with the limited interaction with punks kind of in this initial camp run, it makes sense to get rid of this and maybe replace it with something a little bit better. Scavenger Camp, kind of in my opinion, it's very similar to Outpost, except you're more limited on when you can restore. Now, granted, it is a cheaper restore, just you're not able to use it whenever you want. You have to rely on the raiders being resolved for this effect to happen. And so that's dependent on either using this card to do that or junking or other camps. So just very similar to Outpost, and we have more camps that we can interact with and a larger design space to use from. So kind of makes sense to get rid of a camp that's similar to a camp we already have. I've done a video on Obelisk before. This is maybe the one I'm kind of most sad to see potentially being removed from the game. I know it wasn't a great camp, but it did allow you to have different strategies when playing Radlands. And as I mentioned before, I have a whole other video that I'll link in the description for this and Mercenary Camp, actually, where I've talked about that. So I'll miss it. I think it was an interesting design space, and it'll be really interesting to see what they replace it with. Construction Yard, it's okay. Probably one of the main reasons I would pick this is the 2 starting card draw. It can be really handy, comboed really well with Bonfire. You could use your Bonfire twice to restore a bunch of cards because Bonfire isn't able to be restored. So when Bonfire gets destroyed, if this was hit, you could restore it with Bonfire, spend 1, and bring your Bonfire back. So that was a really cool combo. But again, a little bit on the weaker side. Just the main benefits, the 2 card draw. And then we have these 3. We'll lump maybe together. I'm not a big fan of the cards that damage themselves to kind of do an ability. I feel you're kind of boosting then your opponent's win condition. You then have to rely on using other things to restore them that you could be saving later on for when your opponent is actually being a little bit more aggressive. Some people really like Warehouse. If you have a bad hand or just want to go through the deck a little bit more, you could use Warehouse to get 1+ more card after discarding your hand. So it's an interesting ability, but again, not one of my favorites because you have to destroy or damage it to use it. Cannon, a cheap way to deal damage, but at a minimum, you can only use it twice. You've got to restore it to be able to use it. Cash. Troy, we're getting to cash finally. Sorry, it was the last one here. It's maybe a very versatile camp. It gives you a lot of options if you're needing to draw, if you're needing to do a restore or a punk. For 0, you can do one of those 3 things. Now, that's pretty awesome. Again, the damaging itself and finding ways to then restore it to keep using that ability is what I maybe didn't like the most about it. But don't worry. Again, like I said, this is kind of a sadder video, but you can play Radlands however you want. If you want to add all of these camps back in to the camp deck with the 9 or 10 replacement camps and the other new camps, you can do that. Maybe you have a few favorites. You like Cash and Scavenger Camp and Obelisk, and you love Mercenary Camp and want to keep that. Just add those back into the deck and then ignore the rest if you want to. So there's no reason that you have to, cut these in half or rip your linen cards apart to, when you get the expansion. It's your game. Play Radlands how you see fit. The Radlands police aren't going to be coming and knocking at your door and taking your camps. Well, let me know what you think. Which ones are you going to miss the most? Which ones are you glad to kind of see go or be potentially replaced with something more interesting? Again, let me know. And as always, stay thirsty, punks.